Good afternoon, I'm Bill Anderson. I'm coming live from the Costa del Sol, but by the wizardry of the internet, we're coming live today from the Costa del Sol and Tokyo. And I'm delighted to welcome someone that I know pretty well, Marc Anderson. Marc, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, but we do know each other. Yeah, we've met before.
Yes, yeah, once or twice. Yeah.
Once or twice, yeah. Yeah, Mark is actually my son, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about living in Japan. How long have you been in Japan, Mark?
Yeah, so since 2006.
2006. Wow. Yeah, it's a long time.
So yeah, a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not a sort of 2 week holiday, is it?
No, no, I'm here for the long haul.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you do see people putting up YouTube videos and things. You know, they've been for a week's holiday in Japan, and they start telling you all about Japan. But actually, you've seen it from the inside and not just as the observer from the outside. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. And
yeah,
I think it's quite different comparing like a visit when you're on holiday to actually living here. So yeah, I think there's somewhat of a gap between those things.
yeah. Well, Mark, I mean, you originally trained as an archaeologist. So how did you end up in Japan?
Yeah, really good question. So basically, when I was at university, I my major was archaeology, but during my fourth year, I decided that archaeology wasn't the route I was going to go, and so I was faced with the question like, what am I going to
Yeah,
do after I graduate? And I'd heard about someone who'd gone to Japan to teach English, and that really appealed to me. Japan sounded quite an exotic location. To be honest, I didn't really know that much about it. And so I joined what's called the JET program, which is
mm,
the Japan Exchange and Teaching program. And I successfully got onto that. And yeah, I was sent to Yamaguchi Prefecture, which is the very west of the main island Honshu.
right.
And yeah, I've been in Japan more or less ever since.
Yeah, yeah. So, really, I mean, I think you decided not to go down the archaeology route partly because it's really hard to get a job, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's I think difficult to get a job, and also it's difficult to I think the salaries are not that great. So it's
Yeah,
definitely I think one for people who are extremely passionate about it. And
yeah,
at that point, I decided that wasn't for me. So I wanted to try something a little bit different.
yeah. And there was an event that I recall when you were doing a dig very close to where my office was outside Stirling. I think it was a Bronze Age site or something like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fun, was it?
No, I mean it's a lot of digging in the mud, having to bail out rainwater from the trenches, and you're out in all weathers, all seasons, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's definitely it can be fun, but I think it can also be quite miserable, especially in the Scottish weather. So
yeah.
yeah,
I think you had to sort of strip all your clothes off before you got in the car because you were caked with mud.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
awful,
it's
yeah.
like I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went. Am I right? It was Shimonoseki was the city you went to first, which is right, sort of in the south of the main island, isn't it?
Yeah, so Shimonoseki is right on the edge of Honshu towards Kyushu, which is the southern like largest island. So
Yeah,
Japan basically has a number of islands, as you know, and
yeah.
so yeah, Shimonoseki is very famous for the blowfish,
All
the
right.
puffer fish, which is it can be toxic. So yeah, that's one of the main more famous foods there.
And you tried it.
I've tried, yeah, many times, many times. It's very nice, and I'm still alive to tell the tale.
And
So
you obviously got a good chef then, yeah.
yes, yes, thankfully, yeah.
And Shimonoseki is that a mainly sort of industrial type town or fishing or is it rural? What kind of city is it?
Yeah, so it's basically a coastal town. So there's a lot of trade that goes. There's a body of water called the Kamon Kaikyo, which is Kamon Strait, and so there's a lot of shipping along there. So
Yeah,
basically, that's a hub for shipping, and that's really the main industry. Fishing too is a huge one. There's a huge fish market there.
yeah.
So that's the kind of main industry of that place. But I was further outside of the city, so about 40 minutes north by train. So it wasn't really a city from my experience. I was living in really surrounded by rice fields and not
Right,
much else. So yeah,
right.
um, it was quite far away. So it was even more rural where I was living.
Yeah, and just as you're speaking there, Mark, I've speak a few languages, but it's very clear to me that one of the first things you did was you decided to learn Japanese. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a story that basically I went to Japan not knowing Japanese at all, and the first day I had a wake up call where my supervisor didn't speak any English whatsoever,
Right.
and I thought there'd been a mistake or something. Um, but then I realized just like I was working basically in the city hall like office there, and they just didn't speak English because this is the middle of the Japanese countryside. So
Right.
very quickly I realized that I have to learn the language,
Yeah.
and if I'm gonna even just survive, I need to learn the language. So from that point on, I decided to learn Japanese, and it's not an easy language, but
Yeah.
like anything, if you put the time and the effort, you can get there. But it was definitely challenging for the first year or two.
Yeah, but it's am I right in saying that you're learning the language, but you're also having to learn separately the writing. Yeah, it's not like
Yeah,
in most sort of, let's just say, learning a European language, where you learn to read, write, and speak all in one sort of package. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. And one of the things that was a real shock was suddenly I was like illiterate because I couldn't read anything, so just signs or menus or anything.
Right.
And so yeah, so the writing system. I mean, there's three main kinds of alphabets you would call them. And there's hiragana, katakana, and kanji. And kanji are the Chinese characters.
Right.
And so there's quite a lot to learn of those before you can, for example, like read a newspaper. So yeah, it's a challenge, and I think these days probably it's easier because you have the internet and there's lots of tools out there. When I was first uh, in Japan in Yamaguchi, I mean I didn't have internet access for the first couple months, so
Right.
it was basically just trying to write them down and try and check on a dictionary and stuff. So I did it the old school way, but
Yeah, but
yeah,
I actually think that sometimes the old school way is the most thorough way. That a lot of people seem to think in learning a language there are shortcuts, and
yeah.
because they've got internet, there's shortcuts via the internet. And actually, if you want to get your head around it, I think the writing it down, the reading, from something solid in your hand, a newspaper, a book, or whatever, it actually enters into the grey cells, at least in my head, better than seeing stuff on a screen and thinking some way magically by looking at a screen it's going to get absorbed into the brain.
Yeah, I think you've got to put the work in. I think there's no magic formula for learning a language. It's hard work,
Yeah,
consistency, and I think you have to enjoy the process and you have to acknowledge where you are and just try and be better than you were yesterday. I think
yeah,
that's the best way. And yeah, there are a lot of maybe convenient ways to learn now, but I don't think necessarily they're more effective than just
right.
learning and then practicing what you have to practice. You have to use it as
Absolutely.
often as you can. And I was lucky because every day I was surrounded by the language, and so
Yeah,
like my listening practice was basically if I wanted to, 24 hours a day if I let myself try to listen. So
yeah.
that was definitely a plus. It made it easier for me to get the input for sure.
Well, this is something that happens to I'm thinking of Brits that move to Spain. They go to their classes maybe once or twice a week, and then once they leave the class, they spend all their time with other Brits and don't actually put the language to use. And
Yeah.
this kind of total immersion into the language. Yes, it's hard because you wander about for the first year wondering what people are saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
And then gradually you start to pick up bits, but it's a slow process, Mark, isn't it?
is and it can be quite frustrating. It can be quite lonely when you're not able to express what you want or nobody's able to understand what you're trying to say. But
Yeah,
again, it's I think the rewards are definitely now anyway, I'm able to reap those rewards. So
Yeah,
at the time, it's a slog sometimes, but and Japanese people are very accommodating in terms of people's language ability for the
right,
most part, and they're quite they often will praise people even who speak a little Japanese. Sometimes it's
right.
a joke among the expats community that if they can say one word, then they'll get highly complimented on the Japanese. But gradually, the more you can communicate and you can actually connect with people, definitely it's and I think with language, you don't only learn just the grammar and the vocabulary. You really have an insight into the way of thinking and the way of
Absolutely.
viewing the world, and often there are things that are very difficult to translate into English because it has a cultural context or things like that, and so you get
Yeah.
a lot of insights into the culture, which is really crucial if you want to live there. You need to be able to understand the culture too.
Yeah, but you actually worked with a lot of people on the JET program because you were doing that for what, 5 years?
That's right, five
Yeah,
years.
five
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
Who didn't make that sort of commitment to learning the language. And once the JET program had finished, because it is normally a 3 year contract, isn't it? It's a
yeah.
kind of fixed period. You got extended a bit. But once that had passed for them, because they hadn't put in the effort in learning the language, they found it really hard to stay in Japan and get a job and build their life there, yeah?
Exactly. And it's I think the investment really, if you invest your time and effort to learn the language, then you have that investment in the country. And so obviously the more you can speak and communicate with people, there's so much more opportunities for you. There's so much more things you're aware of, and you can if you want to try and get a different job away from like English teaching,
Right,
there's lots of things you can do if you speak the language. If you don't speak the language, unfortunately, you're very limited
right.
to what's available, especially in the countryside. Obviously, Tokyo is a different story, but in the countryside, especially,
Yeah,
there's not a whole lot of opportunities without Japanese.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I was watching a couple of videos about Japan recently, and they say it's one of the most homogenous societies, certainly in the modern world. I.e., there are more Japanese people there. I mean, it's like 98 point something percent
yeah.
Japanese. You must kind of stand out, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, in Tokyo, probably not so much. In the countryside, for sure. I was somewhat like a local. I'd hesitate to say celebrity, but everybody knew who I was.
A novelty, yeah, at
And
least.
yeah, novelty. Yeah. So and that comes with it. I think the good and the bad. You basically, I think people are very keen to talk to you and find out like what are you doing in this little village, and
Right,
um, but on the other hand, like there are some I think kind of negative sides too. So you kind of lose all privacy. People just see
right.
you and they're looking what you're buying in the supermarket because it's like what does this foreigner buy? What do they eat?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of innocent curiosity that so. But yeah, for sure. Outside of the large cities, you're very much a novelty,
Uh-huh.
especially if you're Caucasian.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, and tall.
Yeah.
And
Right.
tall.
Yeah. That's another thing. Yeah.
So, now I don't know if this was while you were still involved in the JET program or if it came afterwards. I think it was afterwards. You decided to study Japanese cooking, didn't you?
Yes, that's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting because before I went to Japan, I wasn't particularly into cooking or anything, but I realized when I was there that some things I wanted to eat just weren't available. I couldn't find the things I wanted to eat. And
Right.
so I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn how to make these things from scratch. And through that, I got interested in cooking. And
Hmm.
then later on, I thought, I really like to learn properly, like how to cook, like how to use a knife properly and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I somewhat unwittingly thought, oh, I'll just go to culinary school. That seems quite good. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done because I joined as a night school student, so I was working full time, and then after work every day for almost 2 years. I would go to culinary school for about 3.5 hours every day, Monday to Friday, And a lot of this was actually like lessons for cooking, but also like we had to learn about nutrition and hygiene law and restaurant management
Right.
and all these
Right.
classes. And so a lot of it was just sitting in the classroom being taught. And that was all in Japanese too. So that really helped my Japanese because I was no longer really just learning the language. I was trying to learn something in the language,
Right. Yes.
and it was very very challenging, but it was also very helpful, and it was a great experience
Yeah.
to learn all these new not only culinary techniques and things like that, but also like just to be like a student in a Japanese like educational institution was
Right.
quite an interesting experience. Yeah.
Right. Come on. You have to tell us that this was, I think, right at the end of your course. Tell us about the Japanese radish.
Right, yeah. So, oh, you remember that well,
I
yeah. So
remember
we
it.
had to do it's a peeling technique called katsuramuki, which is when you have to peel the daikon, which is you've probably seen it. It's like the long white vegetable, and you have to peel it so thin that you can put it on a sheet of newspaper, and you can read the characters in the newspaper, and you have to be able to do 2 meters of that
Wow.
in about I think we have 5 minutes to peel it, and so that's it's one of the kind of basic techniques for Japanese cuisine.
Right.
But it's a very big challenge for your knife skills, and I was sick of eating daikon when I was practicing because I had all these daikons and I'm peeling and peeling and peeling. So I had like daikon hot pot, daikon salad. I was absolutely sick of it by the time, but I passed the exam, so
Yeah.
after that I was happy with that. But
Yeah, I mean, it's not the sort of thing you want to do after a sort of couple of heavy nights on the booze, is it? With shaky hands.
No, absolutely not. No, it's definitely you need nerves of steel, especially in the exams. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know a lot of people had to make some trips to the hospital to get some cuts
Get
sewed up and that. So
some
yeah,
fingers sewn back on you.
yeah, yeah.
And to tell me where this fits in, because you also took part in, I don't know if it was the Japanese equivalent of MasterChef, yeah?
Right. Yeah, maybe not quite as grand as that, but there was a competition that was a national competition for seafood. Is basically so it was run by the fisheries ministry, and I applied to this, and the dish was your something like your favorite fish dish or something like that. And so I came up with a recipe using sardines, and I applied for that, got accepted, and I got to the final where you have to cook the dish for the judges
Right.
in you have like 40 minutes or something to cook that. So um, that was that was quite a scary experience because the judges are standing right next to you and looking at what you're doing, and some of them are very famous chefs in Japan,
Right.
and and so yeah, and I did my best. I cooked the dish. I was happy with it, and when they were announcing the results, I wasn't really expecting anything. I just thought I was just happy to be able to make it to the final. But in the end, I came second, so I
Wow.
got like an award, yeah, for the dish. So that was a really great experience. But again, I was whenever I see sardines or something like that, I have flashbacks to
Yeah,
that
there was
competition.
almost a kind of Spanish twist, wasn't there,
Yeah, yeah.
to the dish that you cooked, yeah?
It was kind of based on a memory of like barbecued sardines. So
Right.
and so I had it was like a sardines on toast was it was a take on that. So I cooked the sardines with a little tapenade and I rolled them in bread and toasted them and made it kind of like a little sushi, like makizushi style
Right.
presentation with some smoked paprika mayonnaise to give the smokiness. So that was the kind of theme of the dish. So yeah, there
Yeah.
was a little Spanish twist on that.
Yeah, and I do remember seeing the photograph of the first, second, and third, and the two guys that came first and third sort of came up almost to your shoulder. It looked a bit
Right,
strange.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was probably a little bit older than them, so yeah.
Yeah. But you did, and this is another aspect that I maybe don't know a lot. Well, I don't know a lot about, but I'm aware of in terms of Japanese culture. Is the work ethic? It's more than just a work ethic, isn't it? But because you did for a spell do some work in a restaurant, but
Yeah, yeah.
the work ethic there is it's like you're working 14 hours a day, aren't you? It's crazy.
Yeah, especially in the food industry. I mean, I know even in other countries, it's quite notorious for the long hours, but
Yeah,
especially in Japan, and Japan is quite infamous for its long hours in even in white collar work, but especially in the restaurant industry, you know, you're working, yeah, easily 12, 14-hour days.
yeah,
It's very, very hard work, and yeah, there's not so much strict regulation on these things. They do exist, but basically it's ignored by a lot of restaurants because they have to
right,
make sure the things get done. So yeah, it's very, very tough environment, and also there's the hierarchy element too, where if you're the newest person in the kitchen or in the restaurant, you have all the worst jobs to do, and you
right.
gradually have to work your way up. So
Uh-huh.
a lot of people don't even start cooking till they've been working there for 2 years, 3 years, and they're not
Right,
allowed to even start cooking, even if that's what they joined the restaurant to do. So,
right.
yeah, it's quite a. I think it's a tough environment to work in for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you're describing that there is no such concept then in that kind of work, at least, of work-life balance, is there?
Not really. I mean, then you have your days off, maybe 1 or 2 days off a week if you're lucky, probably not consecutive, and most of the time you just sleep because you're just so exhausted
Right.
from it. So yeah, I think work-life balance. There's not really balance. It's just you can fit your life in between your working days,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and that you have well you had then a very small son, and basically you didn't see him, did you? It was like just work home, work home, work home, and the time that you were home you were asleep.
That's right. Yeah, and so basically, I decided like it wasn't great. I didn't think it was I didn't want that to continue. Where I'm just not able to spend any quality time. With my son. So at that point, I decided like. And additionally, the pay is not good in
Right.
restaurants, so I decided that's basically. I think I did my time, and I learned a lot during that time, but I decided to take a different path after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And Dave was mentioning earlier about electric cars. Now, this is something you don't have a driving license, Mark, do you?
I don't know. No. I
Why is
it's
that?
Yeah. So well, I took lessons as you know,
Yes.
but basically, what happened was yeah, I went to university and I was in Edinburgh, and in Edinburgh, I didn't really need to use a car because public transport is fine there, and so then when I went to Japan after that, um, I lived right next to the train station. And so
Right.
even though I was in the middle of nowhere, the trains were semi-frequent. So yeah, I just managed to live without a car, and people around me would often like give me lifts places. Are very, very kind. So I just somehow managed to get by without driving. And then now I live in Tokyo. It's a different story. It's probably better not to have a car in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Um, the parking is super expensive, and often the train is much faster than driving. So
Right.
yeah. So I'm still but I can use a taxi obviously for some things, but the public transport in Tokyo is first class, so
Yeah.
it's really not a problem there.
And for anybody who may not be aware of this, we're talking about Tokyo, and we think about cities that we know, whether it's London or here Madrid, Barcelona, um, Berlin, but Tokyo. How many people live in sort of Greater Tokyo?
Yeah, I think in the greater Tokyo metropolitan area, it's something like 30 million.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So I mean, you're not even just talking about a big city here, are you? You're talking about the size of a small country.
Yeah, it's vast. I mean, if you go to some of the skyscrapers and you look out, you often you can't see the edge of the city. It's
Right.
just goes as far as the eye can see. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really quite a remarkable place.
Yeah.
And I think for me the remarkable thing is that many people living together and somehow it works.
Right.
Like it's organized. You can get on a train and you'll know exactly what time you arrive at your destination, and you can time it to the literally the minute.
Right.
um, it's quite remarkable coming from the UK. Definitely, that's
You should try living in Spain.
right.
It's like, when does this
Yeah,
start? Well, it starts when everybody gets here, you know.
yeah.
Mark, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about, maybe some of the surprises of living in Japan, things that you weren't up for, and also about, how has it been to set up a business in Japan?
Mm,
Okay, so Dave,
great.
over to you for a short break, and we're back
Afternoon
in a
from
minute.
Expat Radio.
Hi, I'm Robert Powell, and you're listening to Expat Radio.
Welcome back. I'm Bill Anderson. I'm coming live from the Costa del Sol, and my guest today, Mark Anderson, who is related more than by name, is coming live from Tokyo. It's getting near to your bedtime in Tokyo now, Mark, yeah?
Yeah. It's after 9:30 now, so yeah, a little longer.
Yeah. Mark, we were talking about food earlier, and your experiences of dipping your toes, shall we say, into the food industry. Now, I have to ask this. Next week is the 25th of January, Burns Night. Have you introduced the Japanese to haggis?
I have actually, when I was an English teacher, often I would talk about haggis, and I remember the looks of horror on the faces of the children when you try and explain what that is. Um, it's very difficult to make it sound like delicious, but yeah, I've done my best to try and
Well,
spread the word.
the way I've heard it described, Mark, is that you take a lamb, cut off all the best cuts of meat, throw them away, and what's left you turn into haggis.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
So it's not a big do for you then, Burns Night in Japan, no?
I have been to a couple of burn suppers here actually in Tokyo
Right.
before the pandemic. So there are some Scots living here. So
Yeah.
and we've had some like fairly decent haggis, but obviously I think it's a rather small number of people compared to the 33 million people that live here.
Yeah, but I have to say, I find it quite hard that the Japanese sort of, I don't know, turn their faces up at the idea of haggis when you see some of the things they eat.
Yeah, I guess it's all based on your context, right? Like what's normal for one person might
Yeah,
sound quite revolting to someone else. So, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I've had some weird and wonderful cuisine, but I think I always try and approach it with an open mind and try everything. Basically, that's my approach to any
yeah.
food. Just try it. Um,
Yeah, I think you have to, and you can always say never again. But
yeah,
it
yeah.
it was like when we were invited out by some Chinese friends to a restaurant that actually opened when all the other restaurants closed, and all the people that had Chinese restaurants used to go there after their day's work. And I did try jellyfish,
Oh yeah, yeah.
uh, but I was told it wasn't very good because it needed more garlic.
Right.
But
Yeah.
anyway, now, Mark, we are going to talk about setting up a business, and what you've done and what your experiences of that were. But another thing that I've come across that I'm interested in, Japan, and you were saying this, you got 30 odd million people living in one city, and it seems to work. Um, I wonder if you could kind of dig into this little bit about politeness versus friendliness. And,
Mm,
you
mm.
know, people can get the impression that the Japanese people are very friendly, but actually what they're noticing maybe is that they're very polite. How easy is it to deal with that, and how easy has it been to make friends in Japan?
Yeah. Really good question. So I think the first part is about politeness versus friendliness.
Yeah,
So for sure, I think to guests, um, Japanese are probably, I would say, up there in terms of like hospitality. They will go out their way to make your stay as pleasant as possible. And
right,
this not only goes for like the the very various like hotels or service industries, but in general, people really they treat the customer as God is a phrase they have, and
right,
they do really adhere to that. Um, and as a foreigner, basically you're often like an eternal guest, so people will treat you as such, which is different from friendliness because often your people will be very attentive and really, I think they'll be curious, but in terms of opening up to you,
right.
that's where it tends to be more challenging. And so I would say, like, this is just my personal experience, but when I was in the countryside, it was quite difficult to make genuine friends.
Uh-huh.
Some people wanted to talk to you because they wanted to practice their English, or they were just genuinely interested in having a foreigner as a friend. Something it's kind of a mark of status, if you've got a foreigner uh,
Right,
with you in your group or something.
right.
But when I moved to Tokyo, I found it much easier to make friends. I think maybe people are a little bit more, maybe they just have more exposure to non-Japanese people. So
Right.
it's not, they don't really make a big deal of it. It's just, we're all human beings in the end of the day. But I think the further away from the large cities you go, definitely there is that slight distance
Hmm.
between, you and some of the people. So, and obviously, it requires effort from both sides to try and overcome that, which can be overcome, but it can be mistaken, I think, for people being super friendly, which is not necessarily. It's more like a sense of duty to be polite and to. They have a word like omotenashi, which kind of means like hospitality,
Right.
and people do try and uh, try and give the best experience to the guests, but it's not really like out of friendship
Right.
per se.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a kind of respect, politeness. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And Japanese society really revolves around something called like heiwa, which is means like harmony. And so often that's quite a strong driving force in the society. So
Mm,
people don't, and it's quite interesting because Japanese people are very, very kind to guests and like shop staff to customers, but often customers can be quite rude to staff, and so people can be quite rude to each other. So
right.
it's quite something that maybe if you don't know the language so well, you maybe don't notice so much, but
Right.
there is definitely different, I would say, attitudes towards like shop staff versus to someone who's come from a different country. So you do notice that the longer you're
Right.
here, that every society I think does have its own contradictions, but definitely Japan
Yeah.
has some like that.
And is there not also? I don't think this just applies to expats in Japan, but this kind of I don't know if it's stoicism, but this kind of way of thinking that people don't often say what they think or what they feel. They have a
Right.
kind of reply to things, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily kind of opening up to people and being. I'm going to say honest, but it's not dishonesty. It's
Yeah.
just a way of
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a common grievance I think some expats have is that people don't. It's difficult to know what people are actually thinking, and so there's two phrases. There's one called tatemai, which is what you put basically outwards. So
Right.
this is like basically your external face, and then there's your honne, which is what you really think,
Ah, right.
and they have different words for that. And so tatemai is like what you should say, what's appropriate to say, what you really think. Often you will not say at the time to save face, often for yourself or for the other person
Yeah.
too. And so it's all about really trying to preserve the harmony, or at least appearance of harmony. And obviously, once you get to know people more, people tend to open up, and you'll find out what they actually think. But
Right.
in I would say everyday interactions, often, you don't really get a window into what people are necessarily really thinking in some situations. Yeah.
Yeah, so something might happen and people will say, "Oh, that's very good. Yes, yes, very good." And what they're actually thinking is, "What a load of crap."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, but there's not much deception. I wouldn't say there's anything like that. It's just
No,
they
okay.
choose a response that's most likely to avoid a unpleasant conflict or offend the other person unnecessarily. So yeah, I would say, like, yeah, often it can be kept very close to their chest
Right.
what they actually think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mark, since you left the JET program, you've done lots of different things, and I don't think you've ever really been out of work, have you? I mean, there's always been stuff around
Mm,
for you.
Basically, yeah. I've been fortunate enough to be able to get work when I've needed it, and so I mean, I've spent a number of years working as a like business English trainer,
Right.
and then after that, more recently, I was working as a manager in one of Japan's one of its largest IT companies.
Yeah.
They do an app for like a marketplace app, and I was in charge of language training, language education for the whole company.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, so basically I've
Yeah.
kind of always been somewhere around like intercultural communication, language education, somewhere around those spheres, but through various different organizations, different companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've now set up your own business now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what the
Yeah.
experience was like in setting it up?
Yeah, so it's been a great experience. I would say I was lucky in the way things turned out. Basically, I had the opportunity to help another company while I was working full time at my previous company.
Right.
And fortunately, the company I was working at allows side businesses. So a
Okay.
lot of companies in Japan don't allow you to have any other forms of income. They want you to commit fully to this company, but that
Right.
company was more forward thinking and saying it's good for employees to be able to have different things going on. And so basically it started off as a side business, and we tested the concept, which was developing language programs for corporations, and it seemed to work well. And so myself and my co-founder, we decided, well, let's actually make this into business rather than just a project. And then for the next year roughly, I was working basically two jobs. One was my main job, and the other was my side business. And as things went well, we reached the point where I realized that I'm going to have to choose
One or the other.
one or the other. And then so and it reached I think a great time where I was able to shift 100% to my own business.
Yeah.
And yeah, for the last year and a half, I've been committed to that full time.
Yeah.
Um, it's a challenge to set up a business in Japan. I would say I haven't set it up in other countries, so I don't really have a frame of reference to compare it
Right.
to. But there's an awful lot of paperwork, as you would expect, and I know we've talked about Spanish bureaucracy, but Japan also has an awful lot of bureaucracy, a lot
Right.
of paperwork, and you have to get like stamps, company stamps, and things like that. And it's there's quite a lot of things like that, and also just understanding like the tax law and being able to you need to have accountants and all these things, and everything's done in Japanese. So
Right.
that was definitely a challenge, and a learning curve. Like just
Sure.
running a business, I think is a challenge for anyone, but when it's not your first language, I think it adds a little bit extra,
Right.
extra difficulty to it. But
Yeah, but because
yeah,
you're dealing with this isn't just about communicating, using language to communicate. It's understanding legalese is really not that easy. It can be difficult in your own language, and when you don't
yeah,
understand the concepts behind that legalese, you might understand the words and you think, well, I don't know what it means.
yeah, exactly. And then another thing is really like the way of doing business is quite I think different in Japan. in terms of there's definitely challenges for like when you're having to pitch to a client. Um, it's you need to make sure you've got the decision maker, but then often people will not give you an answer right there and then they have to discuss it and things like that. So it's really important to understand the way like organizations work um, when you're trying to sell your business or your services
Right.
to clients. And thankfully I'd worked in a couple of large companies, so I have some understanding of what it's like to be on the inside of those. But for sure, like if you didn't know how people work and the various relationships between people and departments
Right.
and positions, I think it's quite it can seem quite impenetrable, I think, for people if you had a great product and you just wanted to sell it in Japan. I think that would
Right.
be a big challenge. And
So
it's
you have to kind of understand the whole hierarchical structures and things, I guess, within the business to make sure you're talking even to the right person. Yeah.
That's right. Getting the right person is often the challenge, and even then, if you get the right person, they probably won't make the decision individually. Often it's checking with other people too. So it can be a challenge, but that's the name of the game. If you're in this country, you have to play by those rules,
Sure.
and yeah, I like it. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to say I enjoy what I do, so I definitely don't take that for granted.
Yeah. And you're focused on working with businesses at the moment, is that right? Do you see
Yes,
that expanding?
yeah. So definitely the plan right now is to really help more corporations overcome language and culture as barriers for them, especially
Right.
companies that are trying to globalize. But obviously, long term, we do realize that um, we can't just only target startups or corporations. If we're trying to achieve the mission, and so we're going to offer like individual programs to people who want to improve their language and their communication skills in English and also in Japanese. So yeah, definitely like long term, we're definitely going to expand to more B2C rather than just the B2B
Right.
domain.
Right. Okay. So, Mark, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Um, is there anything you want to tell us that either were surprises for you, or any sort of, I don't know, cock-ups that you made in kind of moving to Japan and not understanding the culture and the way people think, or
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably numerous ones I could cite. I mean, probably like a simple one and an obvious one is I remember I'd forgotten something in my apartment, and I was with my supervisor, and so I just opened the door and walked into my apartment, and I got whatever it was and came out, and he just looked like totally shocked, and I thought, what's going on? And I hadn't taken my shoes off.
oh,
And so
right,
I just walked in and took it because it was just there,
yeah,
and that's an absolute no. Like you have to do that. So it's again like a fairly I think standard one, but definitely that was one I remember. Yeah, learning
so
learning that way.
so
I
he's probably
can't.
thinking, what a pig! He's just gone into the house with his shoes on.
Yeah, just totally shocked. And there's a lot of etiquette for things like using chopsticks and things like that. So I'm sure I've messed up those.
Yeah,
People don't tend to tell you so much, so they'll just look slightly uncomfortable, and then maybe later you can find out someone else who's maybe a bit more open with you will tell you what you did wrong.
yeah.
So
Or
that's
do you know what
it
you
can
just said? Yeah.
yeah. So if you've got somebody who can tell you afterwards, then you can learn. But often you just have to read the room and okay, something's happened. I've done something wrong, but yeah, like
Yeah.
and but otherwise, yeah, I think I've been fairly successful in not making huge cultural faux pas.
Right.
Touch wood. Yeah.
Dave reckons he'd be thrown out of the country in 5 minutes. Yeah.
5 minutes, yeah, would even get in the country, perhaps.
So, but Mark, I should just let people know that your wife is Japanese, and I think you make a very good combination. When you got married in the kilt and the kimono, it was quite a stunning sight, really, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a blending of two cultures
Yeah,
there. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah, definitely.
yeah. So, Mark, can I just say thank you for joining me today? It's been a real pleasure and I think really interesting, sort of, getting things from the horse's mouth. So, thank you so much for joining me, Mark.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. Have a great weekend when it comes, and I'll be back with you next week.